From the family. That's all. Thank you very much. It's so lovely to be here. This is quite I think my most favorite part of the world. I have, as an actor, been in Washington on many occasions. I think I've done 3 or 4 plays at the Kennedy Center and a couple at the Ford's Theatre. In fact, I once had the audacity to do a one-man show on Abraham Lincoln at Ford's Theatre, which later went on to Broadway and was then recorded for television by PBS. And I did a one-man show on Winston Churchill, also at Ford's Theatre. So I'm familiar with this part of the world, and I love it. I fell in love with America, I think, when I was, well, many, many moons ago. But that love was, I think, strengthened when I did the Lincoln thing, because I researched Lincoln so much, and I had a great time when I was here. I spoke to the Lincoln Commission. I read over 40 books on Lincoln. It was a show which was conceived by a man called Herbert Mitgang, who was a feature writer for the New York Times. And he is something of a Lincoln scholar who has written many books on Lincoln. And I was asked, when I was approached in London to do this show, and I thought, well, this is a bit strange, you know, this refugee from the Royal Shakespeare Company going across to Ford's Theatre, where he was assassinated, a great man, to play Abraham Lincoln. But I had the audacity to try it, and I've never regretted it. It was one of my most memorable experiences. The American audience was so kind and accepting of me, this foreigner playing their great hero. And I did all kinds of things. I spoke to the Lincoln Commission, as I said, and I went to the White House when Carter was in residence and had tea with him. And then we went down to Gettysburg with a leading expert from the American Civil War. And I was so moved by this experience and learning about the Civil War, this great period when America tore themselves to shreds in this period of self-analysis. And out of this came the great United States of America. And I've been in love with you all ever since. And I suppose more so now because we've become attached, as it were, through the family and Beauty and the Beast. Because I do feel very much that I'm part of you, and we exist, as I said yesterday. We exist only because of you. We, the family, exist. I mean, we were dead. We were absolutely dead in about July of this year. And thanks to the persistence of you fans and the way that you wrote and demanded our return from CBS and from the sponsors, we're now here and we're very much alive at the moment. We're on the 9th of 12 episodes, and hopefully if they go out soon and we start getting ratings, we can be extended beyond the 12. And certainly I hope the ratings, I think that the 8 episodes we've recorded so far by far the most exciting episodes we've done since the whole series started. And I think if you'll just be patient, I know there's a lot of scandal appearing in the papers about Linda's demise and the fact that she suffers this horrible tortured death. And all that scandal magazine stuff is wrong. And I think that you've been so patient and trustful of us over the years, and I hope that trust continues, because you know very well that what you demand of us and what we try to give you, which is something worthwhile in television terms today, is something, that trust we're not going to betray in any way, and we are determined that you will like what we are going to give you in the future. We're not going to lower our standards in any way in order to get ratings. Either we will exist or we will die by what we're doing, but at least we shall be quite proud of what we're doing, and we'll go out with some kind of artistic flourish anyway. I just wish that the writers and the producers could hear that applause, because it would be manna for them, manna from heaven. But I do think that they all know anyway, because of the letters we receive, how much that you are devoted and how loyal you are to the show. I'm going to go back, if I may, to what I started with, which was Lincoln, before we start asking questions. Because, as I said, portraying Lincoln, this great man, and I adore the man, I researched everything I could about Lincoln, and I could find nothing sinister or nasty in his background. And this great American, who actually eventually came from just after the Civil War from a place called England, which was a little village in Norfolk in England. He and his family were Quakers, came across him. And during the Civil War, when he himself was torn to shreds by this great disaster, the blue and the grey, brother against brother. And when I went to Gettysburg, it was interesting, because I found that where there is an actual plaque and a little monument, as it were, to the place where he delivered the Gettysburg Address, it's not the right place. That is not where he delivered the Gettysburg Address. At that point, there were a lot of newly formed graves, thousands of the men who had died at Gettysburg. And if you can imagine the Victorians who were rather superstitious about this sort of thing, there's no way they would stand on newly formed graves in order to listen to Abraham Lincoln or anyone else in the world. So the actual Gettysburg Address was delivered much further down the hill by a group of trees on a pathway, which you will see there. I think I might be audacious enough to try and remember the Gettysburg Address. Can I try that? This really is sticking my neck out, but I'll try. 7 years ago, our fathers brought forth on this continent a new nation, conceived in liberty and dedicated to the proposition that all men are created equal. Now we are engaged in a great civil war, testing whether that nation, or any nation, so conceived and so dedicated, can long endure. We are met on a great battlefield of that war. We have come here to dedicate a portion of that field to those who gave their lives that this nation might live. It is altogether fitting and proper that we should do this, but in a larger sense. We cannot dedicate, we cannot consecrate, we cannot hallow this ground. The brave men, living and dead, who struggled here, have consecrated far beyond our poor power to add or detract. The world will little note, will not remember what we say here, but it can never forget what they did here. It is for us, the living rather, to be dedicated here to the unfinished work that those who fought here have thus far so nobly advanced. It is for us, rather, to be here dedicated to the great task remaining before us. That from these honored dead, we take increased value for that cause for which they pay the last full measure of devotion. That we here highly resolve that these dead shall not have died in vain, and that this nation, under God, shall have a new birth of freedom, and the government of the people, by the people, for the people, shall not perish from this earth. Thank you. thank you. I love Americans, I love you all, and I love you even more now that we've been doing Beauty and the Beast on it, connecting together. So let's answer some questions that I will try to answer. Do we have any hands raised? Yes, we do. Yes, darling. What is it?
Yeah. On set, I was wondering if you all get cold, if you all get too hot, or Catherine gets too cold, because the costume's so varied in the layers of things you all are wearing and the thinner things that she's wearing.
We sweat, I beg your pardon. We aspire. It's not easy, you know, because when you get in these little confined spaces of the tunnels where you have that much kind of headroom, and all the lights are in there, the temperature rises to about 110 degrees, even in the winter, you know, because of the lights, and all these people congregate together, all breathing over each other. And we are there, you know, I start off, I start off with a sort of high-neck woolen sweater. Then over there I have some kind of vest, or as we say in England, a waistcoat. Then you have a layer of sort of fur leather on top of that, and then a cloak on top of that. And fur boots, fur-lined boots. It is very, very difficult. And I mean, the makeup artists do a heck of a job coming around powdering us all the time. You can see the makeup running down your chest all the time. But it does get it. Thank you. Not 3 times and ask for Mimi. Yes, I would love to. Cheryl Meineke, a happy birthday today. Cheryl, and I hope I pronounced your name half correctly. I know what it is not to get your name pronounced correctly with a name like Dotrice. So I get called Dotrice. In Italy, they call it Dotrice. Yes, another question, please. Yes, darling.
I found it very peculiar, including the last episode, that whenever Thursday was in Catherine's place, about you never goes to her heart.
What we're saying that the last season, that Vincent would never go into Catherine's apartment. I don't know the reason for that. And that's where it all starts, this tracing of her amnesia. It's an exciting story, I think, but it's not the greatest performances ever given on television, alas. Yes, lady over here, in green.
How did you like playing father to 6 daughters in The Dancing Princess?
And the Dancing Princesses. That was one of the most enjoyable experiences I'd ever had, actually. Because, you know, I was playing father again. I only play fathers anyway. And they were all such a delight, the girls, and particularly Leslie Ann Warren. But it was the director who made it for us. It was a director called Peter Menek, who's a man, Hungarian, who has been living in England for some time and now come across to America and try his luck here. And he directed it. He's a wonderful director. It was very relaxed. We had a lot of fun, a lot of love on the set. And we had a kind of party at the end which we all wept copiously because we were saying farewell to each other. It was a memorable and a very lovely experience. And later, thank God, I managed to get Peter into Beauty and the Beast to direct an episode which was important to me called Song of Orchids. It was a great experience. Being a father, you know, is always a great experience. I have brought up, at least I have, my wife has brought up 3 daughters. I've tagged along behind, playing Father Christmas most days of the week. But our middle daughter, Karen, that's the last time I came here in Washington. She was married here in Washington quite recently. She was the little girl, Karen, I don't know if you can remember, if you ever saw the film. She played Jane Banks in The Little Girl in Mary Poppins. And now she's going to have a baby of her own. And we came to a wedding here in Washington recently. It's so difficult, isn't it? You know, I've been married now for 43 years. My wife, Kay, and myself, 43 years. And yet, it's so different these days. You know, I remember when we got married, I suppose the thought that was uppermost in our mind was, how far should we go before the ceremony? These days it seems to be, how far should you go during the ceremony? It's quite different. And it was, if young people still go and buy books these days, buy these books like illustrated books on how to achieve perfect bliss on your first night or what something. They're very complicated, terribly complicated, these books. It's quite possible that a mechanically minded couple, having read every chapter of this book, could somehow, instead of achieving perfect bliss, have constructed a garden swing. And that's the last time I was in Washington. Actually, it was for Karen's wedding. But I adore this part of the world, Virginia and Maryland. My wife and I became totally fascinated with the Amish community. And I don't know if you know, but there's a place down, I think it's in Maryland, called Mechanicsville. You ever heard of it?
Right.
And it's wonderful. I mean, to go down there, it's like stepping into another century. You know, because there's nothing mechanized down there at all. They go around in black buckets, and I made the terrible mistake. I saw a schoolhouse there, and all the kids were coming out of school, and I started to take photographs, which they think is a curse of the devil. They just don't want them. But it was fascinating. I adore this part of the world. Yes?
I live in Mechanicsville.
You live in Mechanicsville. Where's your black hat?
I do have a question.
Yes?
At what studio in what city does beauty be filmed, and do they allow on the set to?
Yeah.
Yes, to all of those. We film in Hollywood, but we don't film. We started the first season, we had a little tiny studio called Redmond, which was on Cahuenga. It was a lovely little studio, but it was very cramped. And whenever we put a set up, and it could be a very complicated set in an apartment or an office or the balcony or the tunnels or whatever, then we would have to strike that. In other words, take it away and erect another set for the next day. I mean, we were that limited from studio space. And so the producers, hoping for some kind of longevity of the series, then bought a huge warehouse down in a place called Vernon, which is the dregs. It really is awful down there. We call it Vernon, actually. And in Vernon, we now have this huge complex where we have built all the tunnels, and they remain there permanently, Father's Chamber, Vincent's Chamber, you know, and the hospital section and all that, and miles and miles of tunnels. And we have the DA's office and Catherine's apartment and so on. And it's all there, and it's wonderful. We have the mirror pool and lots of things there, so we have the luxury, and the costume department is there, and the writers have an office there, so we have everything under the one building now. And although it's a monstrous place to get to, and it's not very pleasant until you get inside the studios, once you get there, it is delightful. And yes, if you write to people like Howard Gordon or George Martin, and say you're coming to LA, and you won't be in Houston, but you'd love to come on the set and say hello to Ron or myself or whoever's there, and just to watch the filming discreetly in the background, we'd be delighted for you to come.
Where is the city you're talking about?
The city?
Hollywood.
Well, Vernon is Los Angeles, not Hollywood. It's south of Hollywood, and it's in the downtown area, beyond all the skyscrapers of the business area. It's down beyond there. But I think you'll enjoy the studio. We have very good location caterers there. We'd love you if you'd come to stay for lunch, because the food is quite good there. Yes?
I said that during the Winterfest banquet, there was a slate food fight.
It's like one of them.
Food fight. Food fight. Come on.
She heard that during the episode Dead of Winter there was a slight food fight. No, you're totally wrong. It was a massive Well, we were filming the scene for 3 days. Once you looked at a bread roll or these grapes which are quickly becoming raisins, they've got to serve some whole purpose in life. So I started all my herd on a mouse. I immediately got it back. I thought the mouse would have a quick nibble on the roll, but he didn't. He immediately tossed it back. And so we did start this bread roll and grape and apple. And I think it stopped when we started throwing the bowls. Yeah, it was fun. I enjoyed that. I love that episode, actually. very interesting because when I first read it, I thought it was a mammoth episode on great sort of epic scale. All these helpers coming down from above, these people on whom we are totally dependent for our existence. And it was almost medieval when we came down those steps, I remember, with all the torches and things and the wind blowing. And then we went into this huge banquet hall and these chandeliers which were lowered. And it was almost like a medieval banqueting scene. And I remember George Martin said to me that Tony Thomas, you know, of Whit Thomas, said to him when he read it, he said, because we had 120 extras and about 15 sets, he said, George, he said, this is the most marvelous episode for television I have ever read in my life. So George said, oh, thank you very much, Tony. He said, but don't ever do it again. It was expensive. Yes?
Do you watch the show when it's on, and what's your favorite episode?
Watch something you've done on television. Now I know what I've done tonight is a disaster, so I won't bother watching it. But by and large, if you watch something that you can see what you do wrong, that's more important, to find out what you do wrong and how you can rectify that. You may be projecting too much, or you may be acting too much, or the makeup may be wrong, or whatever. You know, they put a lot of white in my hair sometimes, and it doesn't always match. Sometimes I go on looking like Santa Claus. So yeah, it is important to watch, but we don't often get the opportunity because invariably our episode, or the last day of each episode, coincides with a Friday. And it so happens that in order to finish that episode, we have to press on till all hours of the night. I mean, like last week, for instance, we finished at 6 o'clock on Saturday morning. I mean, we worked right through the night from 6 o'clock on Friday morning. So it was a 24-hour stint, and we have to do that so that we can finish that and start a new episode on Monday. So invariably, we don't get a chance to watch it in the comfort of our homes, you know. Occasionally, if there's something you feel that you desperately want to see, you can beg with the producers to let you have a production copy and watch that on your VCR. But during the actual period of it being aired, there's very little chance that the actors can see it. I think Ron has seen probably one episode at the time it was aired because he's invariably working. What's my favorite episode? I don't know. I think in many ways, and this sounds terribly egotistical, it was one I was concerned with the writing with, which is Ashes, Ashes. I quite like that simply because it was based on an actual incident, an historical incident that happened in England during the time of the Great Plague in England, where a little village at a place called E-Y-E-H-A-M, in Derbyshire, they were infected with a parcel of clothes sent up from London, and the whole village started getting the plague, and they didn't know what they should do, whether they should seek help from outside that village, and therefore stand a very good chance of spreading the plague to the whole of the north of England, because at this point it only been confined to London, or whether they should attempt to commit suicide. And they decided on the latter, and they built a ring of stones, which still exists to this day in the village of Iron. And they built these white stones, they painted them white, around the perimeter of the village, and supplies and provisions were brought into them. And slowly they died. There were about 387, I think, original inhabitants, and it finished off with about 15 surviving. And it seemed to me that I was so moved, because I once wrote a screenplay on this particular incident, I was so moved by this incident that I thought, what would happen if plague struck this underground community where they can't all go rushing up to the police or, or whatever, and say, we're here, we've got the plague. What would happen, and where would they get their supplies from to counteract the virus? And so that inspired me to write Ashes, Ashes. And I told the story yesterday, and I don't know whether it bears repeating. So I'll make a very abbreviated version of it. I had a letter recently from someone who was terribly upset about the death of her greatest friend, a young boy aged 15, who had received terrible wounds from... he went on a picnic with his mother, and the propane gas thing exploded in their faces. The mother was killed instantly, and he was horribly burned and deformed. And they thought he was going to die. And so she brought a VCR and started showing him episodes of Beauty and the Beast, and showed to him that however deformed you are, as Vincent is, that is not the most important thing in life. The most important thing is the heart of a person, how they feel, and not just the outward appearance. And the boy seemed to revive, and then there was a terrible mistake in the hospital, and through neglect on the part of the hospital, he had a stroke and died. And she was not there at the time and felt very guilty about this. And she felt so guilty and bitter about his death that she couldn't even go to the funeral. And she wrote to me and said, and then I saw ashes, ashes. And I realized there was some way I could apologize to him for not being there when he most needed me. And so I wrote a letter, and I burnt it, and I watched the ashes go up the chimney. And I feel now that I have sort of exercised this terrible feeling I had about him, and I can now relate to him, and everything's all right once again. So that was one of the pluses of doing something like Ashes, Ashes, and it's a kind of ritual which we've now instigated in the tunnels when someone dies. Does that answer your question? I hope it does. About my favourite episode. Oh, it's your question. Sorry. I've dribbled on for so long about that. But yes, I think that was one of my favourite episodes. That, and of course, I did enjoy Ceremony of Innocence. I think like the penultimate episode last year, which I believe was messed around something terrible by CBS. There were preemptions, and Dan Rather was coming on to make pronouncements in the middle of it, just when, you know, it was disclosed that it wasn't really Paracelsus, or it wasn't really me, it was Paracelsus. So it was, I hope we saw it in some kind of continuity. The interesting thing, I think, about the series this year is that we have done 8 episodes for our 9th now, which, incidentally, I must tell you, as I mentioned it yesterday, Rob Perlman is directing. And this is our 9th episode, and during that, during the whole of the 12 episodes, we do have a continuity. The writers call it a Bible. We have a new villain who, when Catherine gives birth to the baby is captured, kidnapped, and Vincent therefore spends a good deal of his time trying to get his son back, my grandson. And so we don't know at all at this point what the child looks like, what the baby looks like. I presume they're not going to get a real baby and try to make it up at Vincent. The mother wouldn't enjoy that too much. So we do have this continuity right the way through, and it is. I think that if we start off with a 2-hour episode, as you know, which I hope desperately is coming out in the middle of next month. That's the report I've got. Well, if it comes out in the middle of next month, we can then get some kind of ratings, which may persuade CBS to extend this for more than the 12 episodes, because we do finish filming on the 7th of December. And if they don't put the series out the same trend until the middle of January, then we will have all disbanded and gone our various ways, and it's going to be impossible to pull us all back to do more episodes this year. But if the ratings are good, hopefully whatever happens, we'll be back next year. That really depends on you. Yes, ma'am?
Who's playing Gabriel?
We sure haven't asked you that. Simply because A, I don't know, and B, I've never met him. I don't have any scenes with him. But I'm told he's absolutely marvelous. Wonderful. Yes, the lady in black. Oh, it's a gentleman. It's a lady again. Wonderful. Stop changing sex all the time. I'll put me glasses. Say that again, with regard to my character.
With regard to your character, will you think you'll ever fall in love? Because a lot of Vincent is from still within you.
Yeah, well, that's what they have promised. The writers, they tell me, at this moment, are writing an episode with a romantic interest in the father. As I mentioned yesterday, I got a little boy, Mrs. Howard Gordon approached me and said, "You are having a romantic interest with," I thought he said, "a Marine." Which got me a little worried. And they found out it was a girl called Marie, which was a lot better. And this, I believe, is going to happen in the next 3 or 4 episodes. 3 episodes. You see, the whole series has been really about unrequited love. Vincent's for Catherine, and indeed, father's love is probably more unrequited than anyone else's, because the only woman he ever loved in his life was Margaret. And through the whole of the McCarthy debacle, when he was discredited and put in jail, and the marriage was annulled through her father, who was extremely powerful, he got back with her 6 days before she died. They spent 6 days together. So father's love has been totally unsatisfied, and he has no love interest at all. And I think he would be a much more human person if there was a love interest there. People have also suggested it should be Mary. But as he's lived with Mary for 19 years and never given her a second glance, I can't see it really. Unless he takes some very powerful aphrodisiac, I can't see it. Something become interesting. Yes, on the front row, yes, sir. Is there any possibility? I have done a number of albums in England, poetry as well as drama. I had the fortunate situation once that I played Charles Dickens on television for a year in a series called Dickens of London, which was later shown on PBS. And I played Charles Dickens. I also played his father, John Dickens. And during that time, I recorded on record all of Charles Dickens' novels. I also recorded a thing called Warship Down, which was the best-selling novel. And I've recorded poems by Robert Burns and Tennyson and people. So I've done quite a lot of LPs, but I've done nothing in this country. I hope that, next time when they decide to do a record about Beauty and the Beast, that maybe they will incorporate one or two pieces which maybe I could do a start in. I would like to. Any more questions? Yes.
I was going to ask about the Dickens thing you were in. I saw it on PBS 4 days when I had VCR. Is it ever going to be shown again so I can take it?
I don't know. I wish I knew the answer. The lady was asking about the Dickens series. She said she saw it on PBS. It was a long time ago when television was gas operated, I think. And she didn't have, it was before the days of the video recorder, so she didn't tape it. And is it ever going to be shown again? I would like to think so. Maybe if you wrote in and requested, I'm sure they would show it again. They have it there and they paid for it, and they're entitled to show it again. It would be, I think it was quite an interesting series because the man himself, Charles Dickens, was so popular in America. He did his reading tours over here, and the Americans really adopted him, almost as they adopted me, and their affection for Dickens was enormous. In fact, when he was writing things like The Old Curiosity Shop, for instance, the interest, he was like the original soap opera in a way, because although he was writing in the penny weekly magazine, people, hundreds of people, used to queue on the docks in New York waiting for the ship to come in with the next installment to find out what had happened to Little Nell, And the day she died was a general day of mourning all over America. So the man was enormously popular, just like Mark Twain. And I think that it was a good series, and I would like it to be repeated. So would you please write to them and ask them? Yes, Lady Pink.
Being always being synonymous with the characters that you play in regard to whatever you play.
No, basically what the lady was saying or asking was Linda Hamilton, Ron Perlman, and myself, are we likely to be typecast as those characters we played and gain some kind of popularity in the future? I don't think so. I don't think so. For instance, if you are foolish enough to watch this show tonight on television, you'll find I'm playing as someone who's not a bit like Father. I mean, he's terribly suave and sophisticated, and the arch villain who goes around killing people, not all nice person. And I don't know why it is, but somehow the American casting director seemed to think that the English accent is terribly sinister. There must be something very nasty going on behind that kind of smoothness. So they invariably, when they cast me on television, they invariably cast me as someone extremely nasty. And I've done them in all those things, like Magnum P.I. and Remington Steele and Heart to Heart. They've all been villains, I think. So that's why it was a bit of a relief to play someone who was very nice, playing Father. Yes, sir. Another lady, please.
How did you get the part of Father?
How did I get from part of Father? Oh dear. Well, this is the story I told yesterday. I don't know if it bears repeating. I know that a lot of people do have all right, not your own head to be in. What happened was my agent phoned me up one day and said they're doing a pilot for a new series. They hope it's going to be a series, but a pilot called Beauty and the Beast. And they want someone to play the Beast. They really have not much idea what they're looking for at the moment, except they do need someone with classical training, preferably Shakespeare. And they need someone with a sort of Richard Burton type voice. So I went along to meet them. And it was interesting because when I sat in the casting director's office, the fellow who went in before me for the part of Vincent was about 8'3" in his stocking feet with a big beard. He was an ex-football player called Lionel Sear. And he said to the casting directors, "Okay," he said, "give me the script." He said, "I'll read it, I'll read it, I'll read it." Now I was a little astounded at this sound because I thought, you know, having worked with Richard Burton, that he didn't really sound too much like that. So I went in and met the casting directors and I read for them and they said, "Yes, you know, what you did was nice and we'll let you know." Well, the following day, Ron Perlman went in. And he was absolutely dead right. I mean, he had the right voice, the right stature, the right age and everything for Vincent. Now, Ron and I had worked together on a play down in Dallas about 2 years before that, and we'd gone our several ways at the end of the play. And suddenly we met again in Hollywood, in the same hotel. We were staying in the same hotel, we didn't know it. And so we'd done our bits and pieces, doing guest spots on other people's series, and not really making it the big time. And one day Ron phoned me up. Oh, and then the producers phoned me about 2 weeks after I'd had this audition for Vincent, and said he's totally wrong for Vincent because he's, you know, 85 years too old. But we would be interested in him playing father. So I jumped at the chance, you know, it's a chance to expose myself, as it were, on television. In a nice and positive way. No, I didn't say indecent exposure, did I? So I readily accepted. And then one day I got a phone call from Ron. He said, "You're not going to believe this." He actually projected in those days, this is before I started going. He said, "You're not going to believe this." He said, "I have just landed the lead in a pilot." He said, "It's a marvelous part. I'm going to play the Beast in Beauty and the Beast." I said, "Well, I've got some rock news for you. I want to play your father." That's how it all started. So he goes around calling me Papa and I call him Son, and it's great. We have a great relationship. And we do actually love each other, which makes the scenes between us. Myself, and having brought up 3 girls way past the age of puberty without anything nasty happening, as can happen in this awful world we live in, I feel the same protective qualities toward Vincent. I know that on occasion I have been accused of being something of a Jewish mother. And I can understand that. I keep saying, you know, leave it, don't go up there, don't see that woman stay down here with me, all that is going on. But it is basically for the good of the community. And as I say, Ron and I went in occasionally, and there have been occasions where we have lost our temper with each other. So those for me are the best scenes, the most real scenes, when we, you know, let fly and say what we really think about the situation. They come all too rarely for my liking, but it is wonderful working as well. It's very, very quiet. I mean, he literally whispers, and I'm a bit Martin Jeff, anyway, as you've already gathered, because I can't hear half your questions. Martin Jeff's Cockney rhyming slang for death, Martin Jeff. And so, standing 3 feet away from Vincent, I can't hear a word he's saying, not a word. So I have to get the continuity girl to give me a hand signal. She puts her hand up, and when she drops her hand, I know it's finished, and I start speaking. Yes, a lady waving a hat. Did you hear that from Stanley Wilson? Did you hear it? Okay, that'll be great. We'll make an announcement regarding tickets to London and how you can see it if you want to. And Stephanie will make an announcement afterwards to tell you exactly how you can do that. Yes, gentleman over here.
Some of us would prefer that having maintain a permanent relationship, but I don't think the way to go. But I just want to say that before I ask any questions about concern. One, the animal products are they concerned some of the concern that maybe animals will first, but that would be that point. And also, we speak more about the doctor, what the medical advice and training and what maybe talk to the doctors and the type of part and what advice they have now.
Yeah, well, let me explain some of that question, if I may. The first was that is the relationship with Vincent and Catherine going to remain purely platonic? Do we use real animal skins and furs amongst the costumes we have? And the third question was, sorry?
Explain to me about what medicines they have.
Oh, and what medicines we have down there, and what medical knowledge I have playing the part of father. In the first place, the relationship with Catherine and Vincent is purely platonic. It's just unfortunate she becomes pregnant in the first place. Secondly, we use real furs. Smelling my costume, I would say yes. We do use, a lot of it seems to be goat fur, actually, which smells like a bit like feta cheese on a hot Sunday afternoon. I do spray it profusely, but yes, we do use real animal furs. I wish they didn't. I mean, I'm all for preserving as much wildlife as we can. I have a home now which I just bought up in the mountains outside LA, and I spent a fortune feeding all the wild animals. I built a huge kind of hut outside the bedroom window. I haven't slept for weeks. I sit up all night watching the raccoons and the foxes come and eat. I buy about 50,000 peanuts a week and dog biscuits and things and feed all these wonderful animals. They were there long before I was, and they deserve to remain there. And I abhor anyone who hunts animals. I've never shot anything in my life. I don't like part of that hunting fraternity which does exist in this country, and indeed in every country in the world. But we do, I'm afraid, use some animal furs. There's no doubt about that in our costumes. I really should have a word with Julie Evans and persuade her that in future we can get man-made furs which will look exactly the same on television and save killing those lovely animals. And the third one, what medical knowledge do I have? None at all. Absolutely none at all. In the last 3 or 4 years, I've been in hospitals a lot because I remember on July the 4th, this was the year that we had made the pilot. They said they were going to start a series. And on July the 4th, I broke my hip. That was bad news. It was not a celebratory day for me because we were due to start filming on the 13th of July. And so I went to the hospital and I had the hip replaced. They put a new hip joint in. That really didn't work very well, and I had to come across and play the part of the crutch. And I was in agony for the whole of the first series because the hip joint they put in was slowly sinking into the west. In fact, at the end of the series, the first series, the hip prosthesis had sunk 3 inches into the bone. And so, I was completely lopsided. But then I went back and I had the operation done at the end of the first series, and it was wonderfully successful. And so I did gain a certain amount of medical knowledge watching, experiments on myself during that point. Whenever there is something that I have to do, like last week, do you remember that character called Rolly?
Yeah.
That wonderful black actor who came and played the piano and the pianist. He comes back into this episode. He's the most wonderful boy I've met in a long time. We had long chats together, we had long scenes together. And it was such a delight working with him. I'm not going to tell you what the outcome of that is, whether he does come back or whether he remains a drug addict. That would spoil it for you. But on one occasion, he is responsible for holding up a store and gets shot up rather badly. And last week I had to remove 2 bullets from him. Not real ones, obviously. But I did seek the advice. We have in attendance on the set a doctor and a male nurse. And so I did ask them exactly what the procedure would be and how I do this and exactly instruments I use. I mean, that's part of being an actor. You know, you don't have to actually murder people in order to play a murderer or whatever. You know, you pick it up and you pick up the knowledge. You have experts there to advise you. Hope that answers most of your question. Thank you. Yes, sir.
First of all, thank you for coming to me. It's great for you to be here. And second, I was wondering if you could be so kind as to recite some Shakespeare for us.
It's not kind of me to be here. It's just delightful of you to have asked me, and it's wonderful to be here. You see, I get so much from this. I mean, I find there's so much affection, if I dare use the word, so much love from you all for the character I play and for the community in which I live, namely that community that exists beyond the subways of New York, that kind of utopia of these people who have, for whatever reason, dropped out from society and formed their own society down below. And it's interesting because one meets people constantly who have come to believe in this fantasy world, that there is some kind of reality there. Give them something, people something to believe in, the family, which was all important during the Victorian era. And we've lost a good deal of the feeling of the family. It's nice to bring some of that back, and I feel that tremendous affection from you. As a matter of fact, I met 5 girls actually from New York recently. This was on the West Coast when I was doing a convention there. And they all said, one of them said, she said, you're not going to believe this. She looked around to make sure no one was listening. She said, when I'm walking on the streets of New York and I pass those girls, she said, there's no one around, I will shout down, are you all right down there? The other 4 girls giggled and said, oh, you don't. And she said, no, I do. She said, in fact, we all do the same thing. So, yes, it is nice to feel the kind of, the warmth and that's why it is wonderful to be invited to come here. That was the first part of the question. What was the second one?
You could recite some Shakespeare.
Would I recite some Shakespeare?
Yes.
It is so long. I left the Royal Shakespeare Company in 1969, actually. But there is an American playwright that I adored. It was a part that I should have played in Prisoner of War Camp, and for various reasons I didn't. It's a rather long story about how I auditioned for the part of Mio in a play called Winterfest by Maxwell Anderson. It was a play written by Black verse, and I auditioned for this in 1942, and I got the part. And through the Russians advancing into Lithuania, where we were then moved, and into Poland, where we were later moved, I never played the part. I rehearsed it for 3.5 years and never played it. Every day I rehearsed this part. We built theatres along the way in order to put on Winterfest, and they either caught fire or the Russians advanced. And so when I got back, became a professional actor in England, I was desperate to play Mio Romagna. It was based, I don't know if you remember the history, but it was based on the Sacco-Vanzetti case, which were 2 radicals, Boston radicals, who were accused of killing a paymaster, and wrongly accused, obviously, because they were 30 miles from the scene of the crime. Because they were radicals, they were falsely accused and put into prison and eventually electrocuted. And the son of one of these men decides that he loves his father at the age of 4, and he meets a young girl in a street dance on the banks of the Hudson River in New York, and falls in love with her, but is determined that he will find his father's murderers, and who was responsible for the death of his father, rather than being strayed from his path by falling in love with this girl. And he had a speech which was written in Blackbirds, which is very like Shakespeare. I'll do that for you if I can remember. He says, when I was 4 years old, we climbed through an iron gate, my mother and I, to see my father in prison. He stood in the death cell, put his hand to the bars and said, "My dear, I have only this to give you. that I love you and will love you after I die. Love me then, Mia, when this hard thing comes up, that you must may live a man despised for his father. That night, the guards, walking in floodlights brighter than I do, led him between them, with his trousers slit and a shaven head for the Catholics. This sleet and rain that I feel cold here on my face and hands will find him under 13 years of clay in prison ground. Lie still and rest, my father, for I have not forgotten. When I forget, may I lie blind as you. No other love, time passing or the space like years of suns, shall blur your voice or tempt me from the path that clears your name till I have these rats in my grip. Or sleep deep where you sleep. I have no house, nor home, nor love of life, nor care of death, nor care for what I eat or who I sleep with, nor what color of calcimine the government will wash itself this year or next to lure the sheep and feed the wolves. Love somewhere else, and get your children in some other image more acceptable to the state. This face of mine is stamped for sewage. Thank you. Who's it going to be? Right. Yes. Yes. I'm listening to me. You.
Could you share with us at what point in your life and what made you decide what were that you should have done what you did?
At one point in my life did I decide to become an actor. Well, that happened in a very strange way, really. It was never preordained. You see, my home was in the Channel Islands, which is a group of islands